Welcome to the Indigenous Intelligence podcast. I'm your host, Ni Okine. Today we have in the studio with us Dr. Michelle Asantewa. She's an award-winning author, an independent educator, a cultural consultant, and a publisher. Her publications include the young adult novel Elijah, The Awakening and Other Poems, Guyanese Komfa, The Ritual Art of Trance, and Something Buried in the Yard, published by Way Wive Wordz Publishing, which she co-founded in 2014. She's also the editor of the anthology In Search of Mami Wata, which centers on African and Caribbean water spirits. Mama Lou Tales, a biography of her mother, Lucille Davis, received a prize for the Guyana Literacy Prize in 2022. Dr. Asantewa is the co-organizer of the Annual Osun River Ritual at Morden Hall Park. Her first collection of short stories, The Geometry Set and the Mami Wata children's activity book, will be published in the autumn of 2024. Welcome, Dr. Asantewa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for making time to speak with me. It's interesting, when I was reading your bio, um, I realized that is where we met at the Oshun Festival at the Morden Hall. So obviously your founding of that event has meant we've connected. It looks like we connected on that level. So that's beautiful. Thank you for hosting the event.
I thought
So
that's how you were inviting me. It was from that event, but you're saying you must have invited me from before.
no. Well, let me so I did invite you from that event. I didn't know you before the event, but through um, uh, Dalian.
Yes.
Yeah. Dalian
Dalian.
Right. Dalian had invited me and said, listen, I need you to check this out. And then it looks like all the energies aligned, and then we met. So I followed up after meeting you at the Ocean Festival.
Ah, okay.
Right. Right. So yes, generally I think I've given you an overview of what Indigenous intelligence is. So we can jump right into some of the questions that I'd like to explore. It is a safe space, so by all means share what you can. Obviously, you know, share what you're comfortable sharing, but I'm interested to learn a little bit about your background and how it connects to indigenous practices or wisdom.
Okay. So my background, I am from Guyana. That's where I was born and migrated when I was about 10 to the UK. In Guyana, before migrating, we were Christians and in the Seventh-day Adventist tradition of Christianity. That was to say, my aunties, with whom my mother had left myself, my sister, and my brother, and so they went to church, the Seventh-day Adventist, and that was what I knew in terms of religion. But then when I came here, I never really liked going to church, to be honest. Back in Guyana, I actually resented it very much from an early age. And when I came here, we now didn't really have easy access to the Seventh-day Adventists. And my mum was she wasn't Seventh-day Adventist. She had only left us with my auntie, that's how she brought us up. And so when we came here, we were I felt we were all over the place. My school was what was Church of England. My mum was Unity School of Christianity. My older sister, they stuck with the 7 days. So I was kind of up and down, I guess, and I wasn't really settled in any of them. I never got settled in any of them until much later on, some years later, that I kind of started asking some questions about Christianity. I mean, some of those questions were probably intuitive questions I was asking of myself and asking of the faith that I was supposed to be in. And if I could really think of anything that was guiding me prior to an awareness of what ancestors mean and so on, it would really be a more of a cosmic connection, because I think I felt more in tune with the moon than anything else. It wasn't like I could feel attuned to this abstract father God. It was, I mean, we used it because that was what we knew, but that was what we were taught. But I think I felt safer if I thought about the moon, or if I was, yeah, the moon. I just had more connection with the moon. But it will take years before I would understand or accept that all of that had an indigeneity about them. So that is a quick overview of where I was and what I was thinking before I was aware of what I needed to do and what I was thinking. I don't know if that answered that first part of the question, because it gets you get a bit long.
No, that's fine. We can pick it apart. I'm curious. So if you allow me, so what was the transition like from I mean, you spoke about your aunt raising you in the SDA church. So
Mhm.
what did the transition look like? You started feeling this cosmic connection with the moon, but what were the steps that you took to leave the church, and how did you integrate that cosmic knowledge and alignment with the moon? What did you do when you found that out?
Um,
how did
well,
you move with that experience?
well, I was kind of having that unique experience, I guess, all by myself. And not really communicating that with anyone. I was aware that when I was having my menses, that I would connect, that it would happen around the cycle of the moon. So I was just naturally aware of that going on. Um, the transition would take place when I was about 15, I think, or an intermission, I guess. When I was about 15, 16, I had a kind of an altercation with my elder sister, and I seemed to use that opportunity to announce to my mum that I was no longer going back to the church. They were two disconnected events, but for some reason, I was probably emerging into this confidence. I'd had this big fight and quarrel with my big sister. My mum was on my case about it. My big sister was on my case about it, and I just merged the two things and thought, well, this is how this went down, and furthermore, I'm never going back to the church. And so that was a kind of like an instigator, or I suppose a communication that, yeah, this is not for me. Because I did ask my mum some questions about, like, the Abraham and the Isaac, and why he wanted to kill his son and all of that. And my mum never really had proper answers to some of the questions I was asking anyway. So I didn't go to so I kind of stopped going to church, really, and then I was in I guess, a sort of a wilderness. I would still be praying, and when I was praying, it didn't mean like I abandoned, let's say, Christ, or I abandoned the Bible, or I didn't abandon those things. I was somehow just trying to navigate myself, the way of understanding them by myself. And it would be some years later when I go to university, and an interim before university, I met this brother who was saying that we are kind of incarnations of the people in the Bible. So he was taking it on a different level. So I was struggling to follow him, but I was kind of going along with it, going, okay, I could see sort of what he's saying and stuff like that. Um, but when I went back to university, because this was in the summer, he kept sort of having conversation. This was a friend, he was Guyanese, and we got on quite well. But when I went back to university, and I was studying outside of London, I started to have a kind of an experience, a sort of I now can call it words that I couldn't then, and I would call it a psycho-spiritual experience, um, whereby I was also having kind of dissociations, having these sort of intense dreams and what have you. And it made me have to give up my university, because effectively the institution would render me um, as ill, or schizophrenic or whatever. And so I left my degree, and yeah, and I started to have these, I don't know what we want to call them, psycho spiritual, paranormal, all kinds of these experiences that later on I began to reconsider what was going on, what was happening to me. And that was, I guess, how the transition, if to answer your question, happened in that way where, I kind of just went into that space of dissociation, and where my family would probably think I'd lost the plot and so on. So I went through it that way. And over the years have understood or realized what was happening, which was that I was disconnecting from the teachings that I was taught about faith and spirituality and religion, and reconnecting with things like the moon. I was understanding the moon. I was very much in tune with it. I was understanding things about healing. I was understanding things about ancestors. So when I was going through that moment at the university where I was dissociating, I felt the presence of my ancestors. It's almost like they came on me. And so that was like so when I was speaking, people would have thought I'm sounding crazy. But in my intuitive head that was still there, I'm talking, it's my grandparents that was there. So so yeah, that was how that transition, disconnection, connection, reconnection, that was how that was all happening. And all of this was without any real guidance, other than my brother, who was he is Rasta, so he was trying to direct me down the Rasta route. I had this other brother that was trying to direct me down the Christian route, and none of it was just sitting with me, none of it. The only thing that I was pretty certain of was that, one, I was not mad. Two, I could hear my ancestors. I could hear my grandmother and my grandfather, and they were always communicating with me. So yeah, that was another roundabout way of answering your question.
No, thank you. That's really interesting. I guess especially for the listeners, I think what's um what's interesting to observe is what people go through when they have that spiritual experience, and how difficult it can be to transition from a Abrahamic faith into um, into this cosmic spiritual world where you're connecting with the moon. I mean, for a lot of people that I speak to, it can be a pretty lonely road. And yes, these um, words like schizophrenic and weird start to um, be used as descriptors towards your behavior. So um, you mentioned some guidance. So I guess I'd like to understand obviously, how difficult was it to go down that path, and then in your search for guidance. I know you're speaking about the intuition side, but did you have any guidance outside of your brother and outside of this other Christian gentleman on your journey? Did you have someone to give you direction, or did you have like a sisterhood or a friend who?
No, this is the thing. I mean, I've really tried to work out how that could have happened, and I could eventually come out at the other end, without going through the system of what's the system? The system of institutionalization, without that kind of guidance to let me know what was going on. And I I I don't really have a full and a proper answer. All I have was that the the power and pull of ancestors, a kind of a sense of a natural protection, because when I realized that let me try and describe this. It's almost like you've suddenly become intoxicated. You've had alcohol or something, and you've had some kind of drug, and you feel like you're losing control. You're in that space, so that in between space where, right, I've just drunk too much, or I've taken too much of whatever the substance is, but I've got a moment of clarity where I can just think, well, what's happening, and I need help. The point where you would call for some kind of help. Now, prior to this, I had made a decision that, if I'm dreaming and I'm having a nightmare or whatever, where you would be taught to call on Jesus. That was what I was taught. You say in the name of Jesus, and then the enemy in your dream would vanish. So obviously that's what I used to do. But then I was now moving away from this whole Jesus and Christian and what have you. So I thought, well, what do I do if I'm having one of those dreams and I need some kind of help? And I thought, well, the only thing I know, or the only people in the invisible that I know, are my grandparents, who I really, really loved. My grandfather and my grandmother. So I'd be like, well, I'll just call on them. So now, when I fast forward a little bit, when I'm having this, let's say, this moment where I'm dissociating, and I feel that I can't focus, I'm losing my balance mentally. Who am I going to call on? So it was at that point that I actually created I suppose there's probably a name for a pictograph or something, but I drew this circle, and I put myself in the middle, my name, and I put the names of all the ancestors that I could think of on my mother's side, and the ancestors that I could think of my father's side. At that time, I didn't know what my father's mother and father's names were. My father is on the other side, so I put his name there, and then I said, whatever his parents' names are, you all need to come and help me, because there's something going on. I mean, I'm saying it like that, but it was a desperate, like, intense situation at this far away, like, university in Scotland. And then I just left it there. To me, that was like a prayer. You said it, it's gonna happen, just leave it. And that was really what I trusted in. So no matter what, when I had to come back to London, come back to my family, who obviously my family were ready to put me in the institutions. No matter what happened, because I could still hear my ancestors, they were my guide. And then the skies, I guess, but I didn't have any I didn't have any person. All the people that I had that I could turn to potentially were Christians. I didn't even know anything really about ancestral I had no idea, because my mum and family, nobody were talking about ancestors in that way. Nobody were talking about certainly not Orisha or anything. And during my study was at that time I was in the last year of my university, and that was there was nothing even in the studies other than cultural identity stuff. And so that is something that is really important for me to highlight, that I would become very acutely aware of the need for us to have some kind of guide to bring us into, that reawakening. And I didn't really have that, but I had something else that I can't quite describe, and if I tried, I think it would be a bit facetious. Or I'd rather keep what I think it might be to myself. But yeah.
No, that's fair. That's fair. You referenced your that's interesting when you drew that circle with you in the middle and you had your ancestors around, and you essentially, cried out to them. I think that's pretty significant for the listeners, in that you pray to people you were familiar with, people who, which is basically the ancestral veneration. But I want to track back to the moon, and you mentioned menses. Pretty significant to me because uh, it's something that's quite significant when you think about the ways of our early ancestors in Kemet and before. Now, when you familiarize yourself with celestial tracking, you'll find that this is something that our ancestors did, i.e., tracking the stars, tracking the stars, which is the stellar cycle, tracking the moon, the lunar cycle, and then tracking the solar cycle. What's interesting is a lot of indigenous African tribes maintain the lunar cycle, this 28-day cycle. So I'm Ga, and the Ga use the lunar cycle, and it is observed by the healer within the tribe. So the healer within the tribe tracks the celestials, and this is common across a lot of African indigenous groups, where there's a healer who tracks the moon, and he uses that to, interpret weather patterns, interpret patterns of the sea. But it's significant because that cycle ties to the 28-day cycle that women have. So it's interesting that you talk about how your awakening comes through the moon, which ties into something that our ancestors have practiced for thousands of years, i.e., knowledge of the moon and the things that take place around it. And, it all ties into this cosmic energy, ancestral veneration. It's hard to describe if you haven't been on that path, but thank you so much for expanding on that. Um, your grandparents, you referenced your grandparents. What were some of the things that they imparted to you in terms of um, ancestral wisdom? Were they also members of the SDA Church? What do you feel like you learned from them in terms of ancestral wisdom, if there was any? But I guess the question is, were they also from the church, and did they impart to you any type of ancestral wisdom?
Okay, yeah. I mean, I understand the question, and thanks. My ancestors I never really saw them in a church or even a Christian context because they were in the countryside. So when my mum left us in Guyana, she'd instructed my auntie, her sister, when it was the holidays from school, that we should spend time with our grandparents in the country. Um, and so that's what we did. But I don't really ever remember them being church people, going to church. But I think they were members of the Lutheran church. But they were also quite spiritual in their own way. Like my grandfather, he was very much he was in a lodge, for example. I mean, would be things I'd find out later on. He was in a lodge. He also was very much into his African centeredness. You would see him, for example, wearing African shirts, and he advised an African cultural organization, or the African cultural organization in Guyana. At the time, they were called ASCRIA, which I can't remember fully what the whole title stands for. It doesn't come to mind. But but they were like some quite influential people in that he was advising. But I wasn't really aware of that until I was much older. And he must have been advising them from somewhere, I don't know how he knew what he knew to be advising them on cultural things from Africa. And he was born in 1888. He died at 90. And so I felt very close to him. My grandmother she was into like the dancing. We have a traditional, when I say traditional, I mean it's kind of like removed from the continent into that Guyanese space. But I think it links to, we don't know exactly where it comes from, but because it's like kwekwe, I think in your Ga or in one of your traditions, you might say, I can't even say it, but it's like a knock knock. It's like the knocking event before a wedding takes place. So we still continue that, and my grandmother loved going to that, and then she would go and dance, and I think she would go into trance. So there were some things that's coming out of her that I think I might have been not conscious of, but it is biogenetic, I would say. And same with my grandfather. So when I say that um, they came in the sense that I could perceive them, hear them, feel them. But then later on, they would, like now, my grandfather would actually come. I have conversations, and I openly say this. My grandfather would come. If I call my grandfather now for whatever the need, my grandfather would come, and he would communicate with whomever, would communicate with my mom, and so on. So, but I don't. But they weren't 7 days, but they were Lutheran, but at the same time in the lodge. This is my grandfather particularly. So my grandfather, I remember being aware that my grandfather would do things like if he wanted to get a message to my uncle who lived in London and he's in Guyana, my grandfather would do things like open the tap, and speak to my uncle that way. My uncle, by the way, was also very spiritual. So I don't know how to explain those things other than biogenetically.
No, that makes sense. These things are beyond the frameworks that we're used to. And I think when you start to take the journey on the spiritual path, I guess just for the listeners, there are some experiences that are just really hard to articulate um, in language. So I think I understand. But what I'm taking from what you said is that I mean, for example, you referenced this opening up the tap to speak to your uncle. Um, these remind me of a form of ancestral wisdom with how our relationship with water, it is used in ritual. It is something that most African tribes deify. Um, so water used as a means of communication or whatever your granddad may have used it as, it doesn't sound foreign to me. It doesn't sound abstract. I am familiar with these experiences that people have. So yes. So thank you for sharing that. Um, thank you for sharing that. Are there any specific indigenous practices or traditions that have influenced your life?
Um, well, yes. Now, like once the immediate effect of the psycho spiritual experience I talked about started to wane, I wanted to understand what was going on and what had happened to me because it was so phenomenal. And one of the things I don't often talk about when I have this conversation about that experience is I don't often mention that this happened in what we acknowledge as the Saturn return. So I was about 27, 28 when this was taking place. I had to work all of these things out, by the way, and it was like a download or an upload, whichever one it is. So I was now trying to understand, like what you said before, that the stars, the planets, the moon, what were these things that were happening when I was born? What were these numbers? I was being shown a lot of numbers, here and there, and I was having to work out myself. It was like I'm trying to piece myself together. And so when the waning of started to take place, I decided, well, I need to finish that degree. There's no, I was like one semester short of finishing my degree, and when this took place, so a couple of years later decided I was going to go and finish my degree. But this time I'm going to now try and do a dissertation that considers what happened. So now I'm going to look at some of these practices that's in the Caribbean. I was aware that we have a system called Komfa, and where people would go into trance when the drums were playing. But I wouldn't have known where that was derived from. And so, but to do your degree, you needed to kind of conceptualize that practice in terms of what's around it. So I now had to look at some of the others in the Caribbean, and that's how I stumble on Santeria, Voodoo, and these other ones that had presence. People were aware of them, but Guyanese Komfa less so. But for me, my one would be coming from there. So where does Komfa come from? And it traces back, that name at least, from the Okomfo of Ghana. So when you go into trance, that we call it Komfa, but a lot of people who would go into trance or are aware of Komfa in Ghana have no idea that that is the direct, even if it's just in linguistic terms, that's where you get that term from. So you would have the if effectively it'd be a Komfa whoever in Guyana before we then just twisted it into Komfa and just forgot about the fact that it was connected um to the continent. But also Komfa has some links to water spirits, because the Africans who were enslaved and brought to Guyana were able to relate to what we in Guyana they call it Wata Mama, but it's the same Mami Wata. So they started to connect with the indigenous nature of water spirits in Guyana, which relates to their Mami Wata as removed from the continent. So Komfa, I guess, is the African derived practice in Guyana that I probably most started to connect with. And why I say that is because the way the practitioners do Komfa is just in the way how you have in Haitian Vodou, you have they recognize the African spirits and they have the indigenous spirits. In Guyana, they'll have African spirits, but they'll have ones that came from East India during that indentureship period. They'll have the indigenous ones, so the Indians who were already there. They'll have like Chinese spirits who are also part of the indentureship process. And so in Guyana, you have this ethnic mix of spirits, plus ancestors, plus spiritual guides. So I guess I identify with Mami Wata or the water spirits a lot more than any of the others. And from that, just the foundation, which are my ancestors. Yeah. And because I wanted also to I wanted to have children, and doing my research, obviously I knew that Mami Osun or Osun of the Yoruba tradition, Ifa tradition, she would be the one that you would go to for fertility. I started to honor her, and then it just stayed. She just stayed with me anyway. So I guess it's a mix. I can't say it's just all straightforwardly one thing. Yeah.
It usually is a mix. It usually is a mix. Wow, it's funny you've answered a lot of the questions that I've even written down in our conversations. When you talk about comfort and you relate it to Okumfu, I mean, obviously you've been to Ghana, but it goes beyond the names because I mean, a lot of these practices that I've witnessed in the West Indies that trace back to Africa, and sometimes through etymology, sometimes through the actual practices. They are, I guess, an offshoot um, and have amalgamations of, as you reference, in your case, from Guyana, you reference the Indian and the Chinese. Um, but what's significant is that this comfort relative to or comfort is not unique to um, to the Caribbean. There are other words. The name Jamaica, um, I've been told, is an Akan word which translates to Jamaica. When you go to Ghana, if you say to someone Jamaica, it means it sounds like we're stuck. And apparently that's how Jamaica was named when the slaves were taken from Ghana. When they arrived there, they started saying to themselves, well, it looks like we're stuck here. So there is that in Jamaica. There is obia, which is obey for
Mhm.
um, the Coromantine slaves, descendants of the Coromantine slaves in Ghana. There's a place called Coromantine, which is where they originally come from. So these things are obviously traced to Africa. What's interesting when you reference the Indians and the Chinese and how close some of their spiritual practices are, based on what I've explored and read, when you start to understand the practices that surround these celestial observations, which is essentially, the solar, stellar, and the lunar, you find that these things are practiced amongst all indigenous people across the world. You find them in Australia amongst the Aboriginals. You find them in parts of Asia. You find them in India. Um, my research suggests to me that these were all brought to those areas by the early ancestors. That explains the similarities. So it's interesting how you reference the Indian and the Chinese because those would fit into the concepts around the celestials. They also have these similar beliefs about the celestials and other things like the spiritual world and water and stuff like that. But that's interesting to know. You talked about going back to university to go do your dissertation. So um I guess what drove you to go back? Why did you find it so important to go back?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good question. Um, and I never really, let me see how I can put it. So, from the point of my ancestors and what I later would intuit as my guides, I don't think that I don't think that although I had that dissociation at that point, I don't think that that was necessarily supposed to happen when it happened then. I I am confident that what happened was an interception through excuse me, a negative intervention. So how can I explain that? So you know how you mentioned obia just now, and we know that well, I know Obio as being a power, and I know that power, we have different way. We have powers on a spectrum, and you could utilize that power for the good. You could utilize that power for not so good. And I believe that, well, I know that the power in the sense of impacting my line, my path was intercepted whilst I was at university. And so what happened was, instead of me going, you complete this part of your what you're on this tract, and then you move along to the next stage, just like the cycles of life are supposed to be. But because it was intercepted, when it was intercepted, my ancestral energies, my ancestors, my guides, they were called in to kind of like combat that negative tract, from having the most severe or the severest impact. And so once I got to understand all of that, I was like, well, okay, let me go and finish the track that I was on. And then now it worked out for the good anyway, because now I am going to be an advocate for our ancestral indigenous practices. That's what the consequence of that interception is, that although the intention was for this to throw me off balance, so that I wouldn't complete my this particular course, complete my this cycle in a particular way, I it did something else. It kind of woke me up anyway. And sometimes we need that interception, and some of us can handle it, and then some of us actually fall victim to it. A lot of us fall victim of it and end up in not so, in institutions or whatever. I mean, and I'm aware that sometimes it's a calling, and then there are other times when it's not, it's not. And so that's why I went back.
That's really interesting. It's I was listening to you when you said it was an intervention. It was a negative one. It's how we see these things. But yes, I do. I mean, look, in when you look at, you can put it into a different framework and call it a midlife crisis or some type of crisis. But we all in this lifetime get to a point where you start to ask deeper questions and start to critically start to try and figure out what this existence is about. And oftentimes, um, those periods can be viewed as negative experiences. And yeah, it's important to come out of it, and clearly you've come out of it. Your story is testament to, seeking and exploring this journey into self, aligning with all of these things, like you referenced your grandparents and that circle with everything around them. But all of those things, um, obviously have helped you to. That is your answered meditation or answered manifestation. How you came out of that period in your life where you reference how your parents wanted to put you into an institution. Fast forward to now, I meet you at an Oshun festival, and I'm thinking, oh, this is divine female energy that I can recognize. And it's testament to the work and to staying true to your ancestors. So I appreciate how how you've articulated that. I think that's important. Um, it's beautiful to listen, when again, when we started, I just kind of gave you an overview of what Indigenous Intelligence was, and it was an effort or my attempt to bring people back beyond the um, the disconnect, if you want to call it, when we had Africans move from the diaspora. But these traditions are obviously carried on when you talk about things like Komfa. But for us as a people, it's we have such a rich history that dates, depending on how you look at it, if you want to look at it from primordial Egypt, or if you want to look at the Paleolithic era, we have 20,000 years of history that's documented. Um, the slave trade that resulted in people in the diaspora is maybe what, 400 or 500 years. So telling the story before, I guess, kind of helps us to inform ourselves and to just kind of come out of that struggle. But anyway, I just kind of wanted to reference that. What do you do in your day-to-day life? I mean, what are some of the traditions or rituals or practices that get you through? A religious person may pray every day. Um, I know some spiritual people may keep a shrine in their spaces, have a sanctuary, an altar. Are there any spiritual practices that you are happy to share that get you through your day to day?
Yeah. Yes, yeah, for sure. I'm very much happy to share the I have like different altars in the house. So I have one to ocean. One every time some new um energy calls me or recognizes me, and I then go, okay, I see. And if it calls for a dedicated space for them, then I will do that until such time as I just have one room. Yeah, that's like for all of them, like like a shrine, where like some people do on the continent. Um, but anyway, so I have one that's for Ocean, because she plays a lot of, she is like a strong presence in my life. And I used to go to the river by myself initially to, well, again, intuitively, I just used to go to the river when I was doing when I now made the decision to complete my degree. I used to go to the river because I live very close to a river, so I used to go there just to hang out, because I'm like, okay, get out of the books, get out of the study, and go to the river and just take your time and just what have you. And I just used to go by this tree. In fact, I used to think I was going by a tree, and just to hang by the tree. And it would be later on when I decided to go and see this Obia man, who said to me, and he took me to all these different waters in Guyana. And he said, you can go to the water anywhere that you are. You can go and do something for your ancestors wherever. And I was like, oh, okay. And so when I came back, that's what I used to do. So I used to go and actually make offerings to my ancestors. But then later on, the ocean energy sort of not overtook it, but it was like a different thing, because now I'm going to the river. When I go back home to Guyana, mostly that's when I'll do the bigger ancestor offering for Mami Wata, the ancestors. But I do ancestors work just generally in the house. I would, that's through your libation, you know, just simple things, just lighting candles when like one of your ancestors on their birthday, or when they had the day that they passed. Yeah, just those kind of things. But having an altar too, if you get a sense of um a guide that is one of your guides, and I have lots. I'm quite eclectic in that way. I don't even know really if that's the right word. But it's only because I've not too long come back from China, and there are some things that you sort of forget that you do or that you have done that have meant things to you. And I remember that there was a time when I used to pray, when or pray or meditate, and I used to have this Chinese elder in my mind's eye, and I used to be talking with him. And I'd forgotten about that until I went to China. I was like, oh, yes, that was right. And so what I'm saying is like I just don't shut too many things down anymore. Other than I guess Jesus, I have real difficulties with, like, I have to, that one is just like, okay, it's over there. But some of these other presences, they are just there. I recognize them. And so I'll have a little altar to, like, let's say an indigenous one from the continent. I have my ancestors' altar. And you just put little things on there, if you're gonna eat, you're gonna put a little bit out for them in your bowl. Maybe you can make a nice special meal for them. Um, like a culture, like a meal that they would like. Just those sorts of things. It's not really it's not really that difficult. Like if you eat, whatever you eat, you just put a little bit out for the ancestors. You can go for a walk. You can go to if there's a body of water beside you, you just go and stop there. Trees, all of those things I do. When it's full moon, when it's new moon, you do a little ritual. If you can't do it 1 month, you can't do it a couple of months, it's okay. You're having that constant dialogue, that constant, you're in it. It's not something that you have to like be oh, if I don't do this, then something, it's not like a guilt-ridden thing. It's like, that's why it's intelligence. It's spiritual intelligence, and you just have to know what is comfortable, what works, and utilize it. And you have to trust in the process, trust in what you're doing, trust in your intuition, in your inner guidance, your intelligence. Trust it. Trust those sensations you have. I find often, I think with me, once I was like, they tapped, like, I was like, okay, yeah, because if you've been steeped in the amazing and curious things that happen in the Bible, this is what I could never understand. How is it that when some things start to happen in your everyday, you're like bamboozled? I'm like, well, in the Bible, this happened, this thing happened, Jesus put his hand on somebody and then they just got up and started carrying on. They were healed. I'm like, I can do that, or I'm going to try. Jesus was going through whatever he had to go through and he fasted. I'm like, okay, I'm going to fast for 40 days. I'm going to see how that goes. This kind of stuff to me is like, why aren't we doing that? What was the whole example for? So these are some of the things I do anyway.
Interesting. Talk to me about outside of the shrines that you have. How do these things relate to your wellness? As in, does your spirituality, your ancestral veneration, does it inform um, your health in terms of your physical health, in terms of your mental health, in terms of your spirit? Well, okay, you talked about the spiritual health, but in the physical, what are some of the things that you do?
Well,
Like,
okay,
yeah,
that's good. So the physical is that if I really like was like properly disciplined, then I feel that things like Tai Chi and yoga and all of these, there's a sense there's a sense in my being that you knew how to do this in a past life. Yeah. And where, for example, when I have done yoga like more consistently, and like they try and get you to stand on your head, do the headstand, I'm like, oh, I can't do this, but I will dream that I am doing it. Do you understand what I'm saying? So I feel like the total expression of the connection or with spirit is that it requires discipline. If you are going to dance, let's say you're going to go into a trance state or whatever, you need to be well enough, fit enough for those forces to come on you, and you need to be healthy. You need to kind of have like a sense of, of purity. That word I use very advisedly. Um, so yeah, so keeping fit is a natural requirement, to be honest, to practice the totality of his spiritual self. As for mental, well, the way I mostly deal with like the mental side is that I would, if I'm feeling a little bit out of sorts, I would start with like, okay, I'm going to fast, because that was my, what did I use that for? When I returned from the university and I came back to London to try and understand what was going on with me, that was one of the things I decided to do. I fasted, so I knew how I have a natural go-to to rebalance myself, my mental, my physical, by fasting. If I feel very like like yeah, out of balance, I would do fasting. I would also go for the walks, get out, get some fresh air. I would do, journaling. I'm a writer anyway, so I would write it out. My mum, one of the things with the unity that I would take from her is the affirmations. So for me, you have like a wellspring of resources to draw from to keep you nourished mentally, um, spiritually, and well, the fitness is really about discipline, which it's a work in progress, but I do my best on that front.
We all do our best on that front. I Life is not linear. I think it requires different amounts of commitment and discipline at different points in our lives. So I think, look, I hear you. I'm a coach, so I'm designed and want to say, oh, don't worry about it. You're not in discipline. But the truth is, we all have these peaks and valleys at different times. And like you said, the words you used, I like that word, is a wellspring of resources. Um, and it's important. You talked about fasting. I think that's a really great um, go-to. I guess for all the listeners, I mean, just in case there's somebody out there who wants to, you know, are curious into how do you get into this spirituality and what do you do to stay grounded. Tell me about nutrition. And the reason why I bring that up is because, well, I mean, again, for me, when I think about spirituality, um, and ancestral wisdom, it all these things connect. There's a symbiotic relationship between us, between the land, and between animals. So when I think about food, for example, so here's where I come from when I think about food and how important that is. I believe that we all come from a a woman. I think fundamental African teaching will tell you that, you go to Ghana, they'll tell you Asasiya, but when you study Kemet, you find the goddess Nu, who is the creator of the primordial waters, which surrounds the earth before we come into creation, which, a lot of these things align to Mami Wata. But what I'm trying to get at specifically is nourishing the body through herbs and the food. Do you, um, I guess my question is, do you have any suggestions, or is there anything that you do to stay nourished, as in, nourished of the physical body is also nourishing your physical and your your spiritual and your mental body. So what do you do around nutrition?
Um, that's a good question. But yeah, because of the need for a total expression of, of your spirituality and your wholeness, then you can't divorce the nutritional side of things. Um, I think the nutrition and the way I ate came before um a lot of the other openings. So when I was about 18, I one day decided I'm not eating any meat, just out of the blue. I had been eating meat all the time. There was nothing, there's no reason. And one day I just said I'm not eating it anymore. And and I did, I stopped. I stopped. Initially I thought it was just red meat. So I said, okay, I'm gonna see if I don't eat red meat, um, what would happen if I just die? I mean, I don't know why I did these things. I don't know what was driving me to, other than, like I said, I could just think it's just my inner guide, my inner whatever was just going, you can stop this. And so I didn't eat meat when I was from 18. Actually, I have not eaten red meat or like the chicken. Yeah, I was still eating chicken. And then one day I said, well, nothing's happened. I haven't died for not eating the red meat. So I'm not going to eat chicken anymore, which I didn't really like very much anyway. And so I stopped eating chicken, but I ate fish for a long, long time. And technically still when I go home to Guyana and places like that, I still kind of have they have like a local fish that I would feel okay eating, but really effectively I became more or less like vegan, yeah, eating very healthy, a lot of beans, lentils, all that sort of stuff. This is before, or at a time when it was just coming into this big explosion of it. um, I had been going off these kinds of ways of eating, like egg, for example, that same period in my university life. So I left London, I went to university in Scotland, and then suddenly again, I found that I was kind of like heaving when I ate egg. So none of this was happening before. And then suddenly egg became my enemy. And I loved eggs. I could eat eggs. There was no problem with it. And then suddenly one day I was getting the sensation I'm going to vomit. But now I know that all of that seems like it's I don't know what it seems like, but I later on would work out why all these things were happening. Not because they just were happening without guidance, is what I'm saying. They were just happening organically. No one was telling you, you don't need to eat this, don't eat that. You were having to just work this stuff out. It was just happening. You're like, okay, you're not going to eat any egg. When I was at university, there's a lot happened in that period, that what you call it, Saturn return period. And one of them was, what was it? I wouldn't be eating I'd stopped eating the egg. Oh yeah, that was it. I caught bronchitis um at the university. So I had a really bad chesty thing going on. Discovered that I had like asthma. And I kind of didn't wait for them to say, oh, if you don't eat this, then this would happen. So what I did was like, okay, how can I not have to use an inhaler all the time or whatever if I've got asthma? And I just stopped having dairy. So I control like things like that by, okay, I control my asthma by not eating any dairy, really. It's not like strict again, but yeah. And I must say that I brought my mum, who is 93 in a couple of months, um, and was having high cholesterol before she returned from Guyana to the UK. And sort of the doctors there said if she doesn't slow down or if she doesn't do whatever, she might get a heart attack. I brought her back to the UK, and we stopped having the dairy, really, cut all of that out. She became effectively a vegan. You know, now and again, she still obviously has some of the things, but she's more or less like vegetarian-y, vegan-y. So I'm very conscious about, you know, nutrition and the need for it in terms of how I'm gonna. I've written a book about fasting, a little booklet. I'd set up a pamper day for women, and what we used to have there was herbal teas and vegan food. A lot of the women at that time, that was in about 2009, a lot of the women, no, actually it was 2005 we set that up. Some of them had never even had herbal teas before. So, and all of these things were like, one day, you know, Spirit said, do this. I'm moving like that. That's how I'm moving. And yeah, so thanks for the question. But yeah, the nutrition is very important.
We can't leave that out. We can't
No.
leave it out. I think that's integral with the spiritual journey. How are you doing for time? So I booked this into 11:30.
Mhm.
How are you doing for time?
Well, how much more have you got?
Um, I mean, you know what? There's a couple more questions that I wanted to. Okay, so
Hmm.
let me see if I can. All right, so let's do this. What advice? Um, all right, well, first, I'll ask one question, and then I just want to kind of finish off with you kind of telling us about your books and then what your projects that you're working on, and then where people can find you. But um, with all of this stuff that you shared with me around your spiritual journey and the insights that you've had and how it's informed how you live today, and your relationship with Oshun, Mami Wata, and all of these, how how do those things inform modern living? As in, um, let me see if I can ask a direct question. So, how okay, so let me ask this. Do you think that there are misconceptions to the way that you live? As in, do you still have people maybe look at you in a certain way and think, oh, she's a bit of a weirdo?
Um, that is my life. Like I stand out like literally like an odd star. You know, it's like it's bright, but then there might be just a little bit that they're going, oh, that star is not quite like it's a bit like that. So that I call it star deliberately because I'm thinking, yeah, there's light. You know, the light is there, and you can choose to see the light, or you can just think that there's a bit. It's not quite. It's not right. That there's a bit that's missing. So I have to put it out there that when you venture on this journey, unless you can find kindreds, and those can also be few and far between, you are going to be on your own, and your family will just disown you like they don't know you. Some of your friends will come and scorn you, and I've just learned to live with it. I was in my circle, my network, like my familial network. I am the own I'm literally the only person like me in my this is my mum's nieces and nephews. This is my family, my mum's siblings. My brother, he's Ras, and you know he's oh, you know, he does the moon and the stars, and he lives very basically in Guyana. You know, he's into that, and he's very much into the nutrition. He eats very well, you know, and he's actually a natural healer. I think my brother's just a priest, really. In fact, they call him priest. So he's probably the only one. And going back to the fact that my brother was also, I must say, I'll retract a little bit. My brother did try the guidance, but his guidance was on the Rasta level, and he thought wholly that what was happening to me was obia, whereas I didn't see all of it as obia in the negative sense. Um, but yeah, so my brother would have been somebody that directed me, and he was directing me to go into the Selassie era. And again, everything, yeah, for a moment I did all of this because I'm like, okay, what's happening? You know. So I did like the Rasta era for a hot minute, and then it's like, no, it's not that. Anyway, so yeah, it is a very sad and increasingly, I mean, by now, I think after about 30 years nearly, you'd think that I would think, okay, I get it. They don't get this, they don't get me. It's all right. But to be honest with you, the more as it goes on, I just don't understand why, why more of us aren't really properly engaging with Indigenous African spiritual systems. I don't get it. And so it is very frustrating. As simple as drums, as simple as, like last year when I was going back to Guyana, and I wanted to organize a tribute to my mum and her sister, as they're twins, and they're the last in their generation, the 90s in their generation. And I wanted to organize an elders tribute, and my family there were like, we're all right coming, but as long as there are not going to be any drums. This is my everyday. This kind of stuff where you have to, you have to, what's the word? You have to defend all the time. You're in constant defend mode, being accused of working dark magic and all this sort of stuff. This is my everyday, and it is disgusting. And if you are, to be honest, I find even at the ocean, a lot of the people, and I'm finding increasingly, like some of the young indigenous African, not indigenous, the young continental Africans that come to the ocean festival, they come and they say that they're searching for their own thing because their family reject it. And this is just ongoing over and over again. This is my experience. I could write books on that, and my experience. And it's actually making me feel really emotional now, because I yet struggle to believe. And the other day I did a post on Instagram. Actually, was it the other day, or yes, yesterday, because my cousin was laid to rest, and I was saying that my cousin, who was a 7-day Adventist, he wanted what did he want? He wanted the people who would attend his funeral. He wanted them to wear African clothes and so on. Now, most of them, in fact, most of my family in Guyana are 7-day Adventists, and but some of them do wear African prints. So they would wear the African prints, but yet not want the drums and not want anything else that is to do with African. So the post that I was sharing was that, well, I don't understand how there's that disconnect happens, because how are you wearing an African print which you don't know what that geometric or what that design is really connecting to, that the continental African has made, but you put on the garment, but you don't want the drums. So you want to take part of it, but you don't want the whole of it. And this is as recent as yesterday. So this is my life. And again, there are certain things that I can impact and influence, and where I do that. So like my godson, his mother brought him up. He was it baptized? What do the Catholics do? He was christened in a Catholic church. So effectively he's Catholic. And I'm his mother, one of his godparents. But yesterday, because he's turned 13, we actually did a rites of passage for him in a sort of a semi, indigenous way, as much as me and the brother Nana Sankofa could, not Sankofa, Sankara could. So there are little ways that I can, we can have influence and so on. And his mother was saying that she finds it really difficult because she wasn't aware and she didn't know. She's got a great network, but now, she hopes that she could, encourage others to do the same. So it's moving, but it's really, really slow. And it's the parents who aren't aware, the parents who don't know. Some are willing to know. Others are very, very intransigent, very reluctant. And in my direct family, they literally don't come to see me or my mum. Don't come into this house because they believe it's like the den of Satan. I mean, that's a slight exaggeration, but I'm happy to put it out there. I've got to the stage where now, no, this is not right. There are people who are going in institutions, our people, our brothers and our sisters, young and old, going into institutions when, from my point of view, they can be assisted if only they could be guided towards the holistic, healthful practice of African indigenous spiritual system, the intelligence that has for them. If they could only attune to it and ground themselves in it, I'm convinced that some of that mental instability would vanish.
I think you have just landed your plane very, very nicely there, because you pointed out a problem that we're seeing in our community, and you've essentially suggested one of the ways that we need to explore. I find, I'm personally touched by what you're saying because this is a road that um, is pretty similar to most people who decide to take this path will alienate people, and I knew that before as I started traveling the path. So yes, am I alienated by some people to an extent? Yes. So it is a difficult path. So I appreciate you sharing that because that can be painful when you know that you have this healing wisdom and you look around thinking to yourself, I can heal this, I can heal that. And people are still not heeding the wisdom. But it's funny, the interesting thing is they eventually come back. Um, people do know, regardless if they don't come around you, they do know. But the spiritual journey involves both positive and negative, good and bad, whatever you want to call it. Um, but I think it was beautiful for you to share the call to action to have our young people who are going through a lot of mental health diseases and physical diseases as a result of just not being able to connect with these practices that point to African traditional wisdom. So thank you for pointing that out. So I'd like to just wrap up here, but if you could tell me or tell us what projects you're working on now. Do you have any speaking engagements where coming up in the next few months? Um, what are your personal projects here? So I mean, I guess maybe, tell us where we can find you on social media handles, whatever. But then if there's any projects some books that you've mentioned, if you can just kind of tell the audience a little bit about what projects you're working on and where you're going to be the next few months.
All right, thank you. Yeah, my socials are Michelle Ya Asantewa, and there is also the Annual Osun River Ritual and Way Wive Wordz. So that's WayWiveWordz. So you could find me. Those are me. But I was directed to step up the other side of me that I haven't I've kind of kept under the radar for too long. So which is to do some of that, the spiritual counseling, spiritual intuitive counseling side, which I do it, but I haven't sort of made it like a public thing. And so I've set up a community which is on this platform. It's called nas.io. I mean, if you look it up and then put my name, Michelle Asantewa, I don't have the link or whatever. But what that really is now is trying to share more fully my experiences where I feel that these can help others. Because I think because of the way I came into it, I kind of think, well, why isn't this happening to other people in this way? But what I failed to realize, I might have landed in the way I've landed in because of how it past life, whatever. And so I guess I'm a natural teacher, just all these kinds of ways of understanding. And if I'm a natural teacher, which I do anyway, I do teach, is then I'm here to help others to find their way along the path, because it might not come so easily. It's there for everybody, as we know, but not everybody is going to get those interceptions or those interventions to bring them to it in a particular way, or when they do, what do they do with it? I wouldn't want anyone to go through the kind of wilderness as I went through. So I've set up this community to bring some of these wisdoms that I have gathered over the year, nearly 30 years now. If anyone wants to be counseled or anything like that, this is what I'm trying to do now. And so they can, if they go on one of the, well, especially the Michelle Yah Asantewa Insta, they could find some of the stuff that I'm doing there. And so we are having an orientation this week so that people can know what the community will be about. So it will be like-minded. If you want to just focus on your spiritual development, you're raising your spiritual awareness and practice and so on, this is what it's about. It's not about posting all kinds of stuff in a group and it's just got nothing to do with why you're in this community. It must be specific. It must be you're serious and you're ready to commit to that process, because to be perfectly honest with you, we need to ramp it up so that we're not wasting generations, we're not wasting years, we're not wasting energies, and ancestors can come on us, and we can start to have the spiritual revolution that we've been working towards for far too long. So so we're having an orientation. I started this series called The Power of Love, The Power of This, Reawakening. I started that in 2020 in lockdown, but so I'm reigniting those, and the next one is The Power of Reawakening, which I'll share a lot of the things about how I reawakened, if you like, and how the things you can tap into to enable you to find that path, or to walk that path, or to align, or whatever it is you're seeking. And that's on when is that date now? Is it the 29th or the 30th? That's the 30th of January. That is The Power of Reawakening, which is on the NAS.io platform. But yeah, I mean, I could share it other ways, but yeah.
Michelle, thank you so much for making time. I mean, I could talk to you forever, you know what I mean? There's so many more questions, but we'll see. Maybe we'll have you back for a part 2 to kind of talk about some of your work. But I appreciate that you made time. Thank you very much for your insights, and it's been a pleasure to host you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brother Nee. It has been wonderful to be able to share some of my insights and to hear from you as well, some of the connective tissues of our traditions. Thank you.
You're welcome.